We're going to start with the roller coaster ride on Wall Street, where stocks have been in a nosedive for weeks over rising inflation and those fears of a looming recession.
Yeah, now the Fed was supposed to raise rates by another half point this week, but now there's speculation it could be an even bigger rate hike. NBC News correspondent Tom Costello has the latest.
Wall Street's closing bells sound cheery, but a dark cloud is hanging over the markets and the economy. Red arrows across the board and a big slide on Monday.
Overall, just an ugly day.
The Dow Jones Industrials closing down 876, now 16% lower for the year. The tech and biotech-heavy Nasdaq down 30% year to date. And the broader S&P index, common in Americans' portfolios, sliding into bear market territory, down 21% this year. Real money that Americans invest to one day retire, pay for kids' college, or a new house. The advice from most financial experts, despite the high stress and the anxiety, if you have a long-term time horizon, don't panic.
The advice for most people is just stick it out. Don't try to change your portfolio now.
Meanwhile, more Americans in more states are hitting the so-called pain point, where gas tops $5 a gallon, forcing them to cut back on driving or spending.
I've already curtailed my driving as it is.
As inflation takes a huge bite out of almost every American family budget. Clothing up 5%, housing up 5.5%, food up 10% in 1 year, new cars up 12.5%, used cars up 16%. Outside Detroit, Briz Brown had to find a closer daycare for her son as she takes on a second job delivering groceries.
It's hard to keep food on the table. The rent prices are going up. It's hard to keep roof over our head. Even utilities are going up.
The Federal Reserve, the nation's central bank, under intense pressure to stem inflation after failing to act sooner. Now expected to raise interest rates tomorrow to slow inflation.
The Fed has to worry about whether or not it can stick to those game plans and whether or not Wall Street will believe them down the line. That's why Fed credibility, so to speak, is so key right now.
All right, Tom Costello, thanks for that report.
In Washington this morning, there's new fallout from the second hearing of the January 6th committee. Attorney General Merrick Garland says he's watching closely as the committee lays out its findings. Yesterday's hearing was focused on the so-called big lie of a stolen election in 2020. NBC News senior congressional correspondent Garrett Hake was in the hearing. Joined us now on Capitol Hill with the details. Garrett, good morning.
Hey, Joe. Good morning. Yeah, long hearing with the simple focus, the idea that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, that his top advisors, his paid staff, even his family members knew it. The committee arguing that Trump's lies about winning the election are directly what fueled the January 6th insurrection.
In its second public hearing, the January 6th committee laying out its case that the former president was told repeatedly by his own advisors his conspiracies about a stolen election were false.
I was somewhat demoralized because I thought, boy, if he really believes this stuff, he has, lost contact with he's become detached from reality if he really believes this stuff.
Top Trump campaign officials testifying after seeing the results come in, they tried and failed to stop the president from declaring victory on election night.
Frankly, we did win this election.
Ballots were still being counted. Ballots were stays. And it was far too early to be making any proclamation like that.
There were suggestions by, I believe it was Mayor Giuliani, to go and declare victory and say that we'd won it outright.
Miller also testifying Giuliani was intoxicated as he advised the president on election night. Giuliani's attorney denies he was drinking at all. The president's embrace of unsupported theories about machines switching votes or a truckload full of fraudulent ballots later parroted by rioters. But dividing his allies. Campaign manager Bill Stepien, who had to withdraw from planned live testimony when his wife went into labor, on one side, Giuliani on the other.
He called them kind of my team and Rudy's team. I didn't mind being characterized as being part of Team Normal.
Trump embracing Giuliani even as 61 out of 62 legal challenges by his campaign were dismissed or defeated, and Justice Department officials told him they debunked claims of fraud.
We said, I have confidence in Rudy.
Trump releasing a 12-page statement overnight, largely repeating his debunked election fraud claims.
So where will all this lead? Overnight, the committee seemed to disagree internally over whether it would criminally refer former President Trump or others to the Justice Department or simply present all the evidence. Either way, the current Attorney General says his team is watching closely.
I'll be watching all of it, and I can assure you that the January 6th prosecutors are watching all the hearings as well.
The committee also following the money they laid out yesterday that Mr. Trump raised something like $250 million, much of it earmarked for something called the Election Defense Fund in the weeks after the election. The only problem, that fund didn't actually exist. Most of that money going to Mr. Trump's existing political super PAC. Joe, one of the committee members said this is the big lie, becoming what they called the big ripoff.
Garrett Haake, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Now, the House committee was focused on striking a different tone at yesterday's hearing, one focused on the election lies and false claims of voter fraud pushed by members of the former president's inner circle, as you just heard from Garrett. Let's now bring in NBC News legal analyst Paul Butler to talk about it more. Paul's a former federal prosecutor and also a professor at Georgetown School of Law. Paul, good morning. I'm going to ask you about those finance issues in just a minute, but first I just want to hear sort of what you make from what we heard in yesterday's hearing, these specific testimonies, especially when it comes to how members of the former president's family testified that they were trying to convince him of the fact that he lost the election.
Yes, Savannah, the opening hearing on Thursday was dramatic and graphic. Yesterday was more lawyerly, but just as devastating. So Trump's campaign manager told him on election night it was too early to declare victory, but Trump did it anyway. This is all about whether Donald Trump actually believed the big lie, or if he really thought he won the election. If he actually believed he won, then that would be a defense and a criminal prosecution. The committee clearly believes there was criminal intent, that Trump knew the big lie was a lie, and it has lots of circumstantial evidence to support that claim. So yesterday we heard from these eyewitnesses like Barr that Trump didn't care about the facts or evidence. Attorney General Barr actually laughed at some of Trump's big lie theories because they were so outlandish.
Paul, now I want to ask you about those finance issues we heard a little bit about. So the House committee spent some time near the end of yesterday's hearing to focus on how the Trump team was still sending out these emails, as Garrett mentioned, for this election defense fund, raising millions of dollars. First, let's take a listen to what they said yesterday.
The claims that the election was stolen were so successful. President Trump and his allies raised $250 million, nearly $100 million in the first week after the election.
What does that tell you sort of about the scope of these claims of voter fraud? And also, is there anything illegal here the committee could be investigating specifically, since people donated money and it was moved around in various places?
Yeah, that's a great question, Savannah. So we need to know more about what representations were made to donors. If there's evidence that contributions were solicited by people who knew they were going to be used for other purposes, that could be grounds for prosecution. So false pretenses is the key to any criminal case for fraud. But for your other question about how does this relate to the hearing, think of two audiences. One is the Department of Justice. Congress doesn't have the power to refer, or Congress can refer the case for criminal prosecution, but it can't authorize a prosecution. So the department hopes that, or the panel hopes that the Justice Department will look at these videos and the court of public opinion will help move. So the evidence about Trump's campaign raising millions of dollars off the big lie, part of that is to tell Trump's donors, wow, you guys were getting played. So that's designed to create public sentiment against Trump, even from his own base.
Great point there, Paul Butler. We appreciate your analysis. Thanks for your time this morning. And now the third January 6th hearing is set for tomorrow. You can watch it right here on NBC News Now. Our live special coverage gets underway at 9:30 a.m. Eastern.
This morning, millions of people around the country are bracing for another day of intense summer heat. A record-setting heat wave is gripping much of the nation. It's also causing some severe weather in some places. NBC News correspondent Kathy Park joins us now from sweltering Chicago with more on this summer blast. Kathy, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning to you. That's right. The sweltering heat wave is still a big headline across the country, but overnight severe storms blew through the Midwest, leaving a path of destruction, including right here in Chicago. Right here from our vantage point on the ground, behind me here is a building that sustained some damage. You can't really see it from where we are, but if you take a look at these aerial images, you'll notice that the roof was completely peeled off by the fierce winds, sending residents scrambling. You can see that the third floor is completely exposed, but fortunately we have found out that no one was seriously hurt.
Overnight severe weather triggering tornado warnings in the Midwest. Sirens blaring in downtown Chicago as powerful storms pummeled the area, peeling back the roof of an apartment building in Bellwood, Illinois, as people took shelter inside.
I was finally able to see the whole roof fell down.
The dangerous weather forcing a ground stop at O'Hare International Airport, where wind gusts reached 84 miles per hour. Instead of heading to their gates, travelers moved to shelter areas for safety.
Moved us all the way from the windows. Couldn't nobody sit up on this side. Got pretty windy out there.
The explosive burst of storms fueled by the same heat dome that has gripped the Southwest for days and is now moving east. 100 million Americans are under heat alerts, sweltering in temperatures 90 degrees or hotter. The brutal weather being blamed for at least one death in Colorado, while in Texas, the state's electric grid operator, ERCOT, reported record-setting power usage Sunday. St. Louis will be scorching in the triple digits. Charlotte, North Carolina will likely crack the century mark for the first time in 7 years. And Chicago flirting with 100 degrees too. Heat is a #1 weather-related killer in the U.S., and health officials say it's critical to take it easy, especially when the humidity is so high.
Try to limit your time if you are out to shorter periods, take frequent breaks, make sure and drink plenty of water.
In the upper Midwest, Yellowstone National Park closed to visitors on Monday as unprecedented amounts of rain washed away roads and bridges. The historic flooding setting off landslides, plunging an entire house into the river.
That is insane.
3 new wildfires also ignited over the weekend in California. The sweltering heat complicating efforts to contain the flames, with nearly 60% of the state facing extreme drought conditions.
And back here in Chicago, when you factor in the humidity today, it will feel like 109 degrees. And because of the extreme heat throughout the Midwest, some schools in Minneapolis and Milwaukee will be going virtual or dismissing their students early. Joe?
All right, Kathy, at least you're in the shade there. Hopefully that's helping.
All right, so what can we expect from this heat wave for the rest of the week? Let's check out your Morning News Now weather forecast.
Meteorologist Michelle Grossman is here with that. Hey, Michelle.
Hey there, guys. And yeah, we're going to see that heat continuing. So coast to coast extreme weather. We have video out of Yellowstone. So Kathy was talking about that massive flooding, historical flooding. I mean, these images are wild. All entrances closed to Yellowstone. It's closed. And this is a peak season for tourists to be visiting here. Rock slides, mudslides, and we saw bridges washed away. Some of these bridges are over 100 years old. So really a devastating scene. It's going to take a while where we sort of sort this out. It was a combination of heavy rainfall and also snowmelt, like really fast snowmelt that caused all these issues. So that's going to be a story over the next several days. We have other couple stories. Strong storms in the upper Midwest, the mid-Atlantic, record highs stretching from the Southwest to the Midwest to the Southeast, also parts of the Carolinas, and again, watching fire risk. We need to mention the tropics too, because we're watching a little disturbance there as well. So coast to coast heat today, 172 million Americans are going to see afternoon highs above 90 degrees so early in the season. And we're looking at temperatures into the triple digits for so many of us. So dangerous heat once again today. Your heat warnings, that's in the hot pink in the upper Midwest, parts of the Carolinas, where we're going to see temperatures into the upper 90s, some spots into the triple digits, but feeling like 110 in some spots. The scorching heat continues today. Temperatures in the upper 90s, feeling like 107 in Chicago, where Kathy is. It's going to feel like 109 in Cincinnati, feeling like 109 in Charlotte. No relief by tomorrow. We're not going to see relief tonight either. We're not going to see those temperatures dipping down. That's part of the problem too. So tomorrow, temperatures back into the 90s. It's going to feel like 105 in Detroit. It will feel like 104 in Lexington. The heat, the humidity, that is sparking the severe weather. So we're looking at severe weather today into the evening, 20 million people at risk, winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour, damaging hail, and also a tornado or two. We're looking along the Carolinas, also the mid-Atlantic, D.C., Norfolk, Wilmington. We could see some of those storms as we head throughout the afternoon hours. And guys, we're going to be watching severe weather not only today, but tomorrow and also Thursday. It could be pretty strong in terms of tornadoes tomorrow. So we're going to watch that closely for you.
Oh, my goodness. Just so much red on that map. So many high temperatures.
Yep.
All right, Michelle, thank you. See you in a bit. This morning, any hopes of getting people out of the war-ravaged city of Severodonetsk in eastern Ukraine have suffered a major blow after the last of 3 bridges was destroyed. The governor of Luhansk says the evacuation of civilians and the delivery of aid is now impossible. But the city's mayor says efforts are still being made to get people out. NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter reports from central Ukraine.
This morning, Severodonetsk is still standing, but all 3 bridges into the city now destroyed. There's no way out. President Zelensky says the battle for the Donbass region will surely go down in military history as one of the most brutal battles in and for Europe. Lacking the heavy artillery needed, Ukrainian soldiers are engaging Russian troops in urban street battles in the key eastern city. But even as losses mount for Ukraine, Zelensky says we are still beating back Russian forces. The head of Ukraine's armed forces says that Russia has 10 times more firepower than Ukraine. But additional help may be on the way. Sources telling NBC News the Biden administration could soon announce more military aid for Ukraine, including additional weapons and equipment, and it's badly needed. After Severodonetsk, Russian artillery is pummeling the town of Lysychansk, and in the firing line, the city of Bakhmut. There's nothing good happening here, Valia says, and it's not clear how this will end. But in places where there's no longer fighting, around the suburbs of Kyiv, a stark contrast. The Russians left Bucha 2.5 months ago. The city's synonymous with some of the most brutal scenes this war has seen. Yesterday, 7 more civilian bodies uncovered from a mass grave. Police say they were tortured, shot in the knees, their hands tied with tape. The recovery here is slow going. A long road, and returning comes first. And resilience, says military psychologist Natalia Zaretska, is not in short supply.
How do you heal a town like this? How do you possibly start? Where do you start?
People would like to clean everything from Russia.
Just scrub it, get it all away.
Absolutely.
Now, we've also been speaking with a woman named Irina who fled Severodonetsk just 3 days ago. We asked her why she stayed so long as fighting got so intense, and she said not only just to take care of her parents and her elderly grandmother, but also because she hasn't had cell service in months. She had no idea. She wasn't able to get news. She wasn't able to get information from friends. She had no idea just how bad it had gotten since arriving here in the relative safety of Dnipro. She hasn't been able to get a hold of her parents. I'll send it back to you.
All right, Molly Hunter, thank you so much.
For more on this, let's bring in William Taylor. He is the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and the vice president of Russia and Europe at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Ambassador, thanks so much for joining us. I do want to start with the situation in Severodonetsk, which appears to be the current epicenter of the fighting in the Donbass. Russian forces have destroyed the last remaining bridge out of the city. Civilians are trapped inside a chemical plant. Are we seeing another Mariupol unfolding here?
I don't think so, Joe. I think that it's clearly dire. It's clearly desperate in Severodonetsk. However, unlike Mariupol, they're not surrounded. And Mariupol, the fighters there, the soldiers there were trying to defend themselves, and they were surrounded on all sides. They were surrounded by the Sea of Azov, and Russian troops all the way around. That's not the case in Severodonetsk. There is a way out. The bridges are one way out, but I'm told that the low water times, you can get across that river. So it's possible that they can move out. And the Ukrainian military, they understand exactly what's going on. They're putting up a great fight. They're destroying a lot of the Russians in the Russian military, but they also know that they need to protect themselves and they need to protect the rest of Ukraine. So they've got good thoughts on this.
Let's talk more about the fight. One of Ukraine's presidential advisors tweeted a list of heavy weapons the country wants ahead of tomorrow's defense ministers meeting. They include 1,000 howitzers, 300 multiple launch rocket systems, and 500 tanks. These numbers are a lot higher than what's been committed so far. So first, does the West have the capacity to supply all of that? And should it do that with Russia continuing to target Western arms shipments?
Well, on the second question, Joe, absolutely the West should provide as much as we possibly can. And the kinds of things that the Ukrainians are asking for are the right kinds of things. That's long-range artillery, that's long-range rockets, in order to take out the artillery, the Russian artillery that is bombarding in Severodonetsk that you just described. So, yes, we have the capability. We are providing those right now. The United States and other nations, other NATO nations are providing those weapons, and they should continue.
And Ambassador, Ukraine says the country's grain harvest is likely to drop by almost half this year, which isn't surprising. But much of last year's harvest is stranded on ports along the Black Sea, and negotiations aimed at getting it all out have been stalled. So here's a tough question. Should the West compromise with Russia to get these vital grain shipments out, especially if it would help avert a global food crisis?
Now, what should happen is President Putin and the Russians should allow that grain out. It's unconscionable that they are bottling up this wheat. They can do that. The Russians can allow these ships, after they're filled up with grain, to go out through Odessa into the Black Sea and provide the grain to the world. The Russians can do that, and they should.
Ambassador Taylor, always good to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Let's get some other international headlines as well. Authorities in China have linked a major COVID outbreak to a single bar in Beijing.
NBC News foreign correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer joins us now from Beijing with more on that and the other stories making headlines. Janice, good morning.
Good morning. We begin here and the COVID outbreak that authorities are trying to wrestle with by mass testing millions of people here in Beijing, as well as shutting down parts of the city. There are roughly 300 cases so far, all linked to one night at an all-night bar. Authorities have also identified 10,000 close contacts. And under China's zero COVID policy, that means targeted lockdowns, quarantines, schools are closed down, as well as stores and some restaurants. Spain is in the grip of its first heat wave of the year, with temperatures expected to hit 111.2 degrees Fahrenheit. It's already being called the worst heat in 20 years, and it's expected to get worse. It follows the hottest May on record, and the temperatures, again, expected to rise already 3 degrees above average. Health officials are warning people about dizziness and headaches. And finally, Germany is making moves to legalize recreational cannabis. It's going further than just decriminalizing possession. The plan is to also allow for cultivation, trade, and transport. The government says that any policy will be designed to protect kids and teenagers, and they expect to table this new law before the end of the year. And that's a look at your headlines today.
And then Savannah can give them some tips on how to be a cannabis sommelier.
Yeah, if they need any tips on what the quality's like, what the experience.
Got a new pro here.
I didn't experience myself. All right, Janice, thank you.
We're back with new insight this morning into the ongoing baby formula crisis. A new report claims many manufacturing plants, including the Abbott plant in Michigan, went unchecked by health inspectors during the brunt of the pandemic. NBC News correspondent Emily Aketa tells us more.
Just as a major baby formula plant starts up production again, new scrutiny around conditions there before the closure of an Abbott nutrition site in February that accelerated a critical formula shortage.
These are the shows.
According to federal records reported by the Associated Press but not seen by NBC News, the Abbott site went unchecked for 2 years. Then last fall, inspectors found standing water and inadequate hand washing but never issued a formal warning. Just months later, the plant was voluntarily closed, according to the FDA, due to bacterial contamination. The AP reports the 3 biggest baby formula manufacturers weren't inspected at all during 2020. The Food and Drug Administration has said it's committed to annual inspections, but that tendency was derailed by the pandemic.
FDA was in a tough situation. They knew they had to protect the health of their workers in a pandemic crisis, but there was a cost to that. And that cost is that they missed out on chances to catch food safety issues.
The FDA told the AP it skipped about 15,000 U.S. inspections because of COVID, though it has already made up a third of those. The agency telling NBC News last week, our top priority right now is addressing the dire need for infant formula in the U.S. market. Going on to say, including ensuring Abbott takes the appropriate corrective action to address insanitary conditions observed by the FDA. At the end of May, out-of-stock rates of baby formula soared to 74% nationally, according to Data Assembly, with 1 in 5 states almost completely out of formula.
It's just been such a struggle to find any formula anywhere.
As if moms need more things to do.
Exactly. Like, we're busy enough trying to get through the day with the kids, and now it's another thing that we have to worry about.
Many families hope outside help will ease the desperate scramble for the critical food source. 95,000 tins of baby formula were flown in from Australia Sunday, with millions of more bottles on the way this month. But some, like Maricela Latch, aren't holding their breath.
Have you noticed any kind of improvement on store shelves in recent days or weeks?
I have, but not with the one I need. It's ridiculous to think that like a newborn can't be fed.
Thanks to Emily Aketa for that report. Congress is taking action to try and prevent this from happening again. A recently introduced bill would require inspections at baby formula manufacturers every 6 months, some of them unannounced, regardless of the plant's history. A federal watchdog also says it's investigating whether the FDA properly inspected the Abbott facility in the months leading up to the formula recall.
Parents are also facing another growing crisis among kids, early childhood obesity. Researchers are hoping to identify how much the disease is determined by genetics or the environment kids grow up in. NBC News health reporter Erica Edwards had exclusive access to the world's first maternal and infant lab where scientists are working to find those answers.
I know, little man.
At just 2 weeks old, Jamison Hardy is helping scientists uncover the beginnings of obesity. First into the pea pod to measure his body fat.
Why is it important to know Jamison's body fat at just 2.5 weeks old?
From pregnancy to 2 is really setting the stage for lifetime health.
Then into this chamber to calculate metabolism, how fast he burns calories during a typical 2-hour newborn cycle of sleeping and eating.
This is the only machine of its kind in the world. Why is it important in the study for obesity?
We don't understand what makes the metabolism different between people. So by making measurements of metabolism in very small people, where it's really just about their biology, because the food is generally the same, is going to lead to some really exciting discoveries and how it can set the stage for future health and disease.
Leanne Redmond directs the maternal and infant lab at Pennington Biomedical Research Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Her team's work could provide the missing link in solving America's obesity crisis by breaking the cycle over generations.
A child is definitely born predisposed to obesity, but it doesn't just stop with the parents. Now we know that obesity risk can be established over 2 generations.
In other words, my health right now will influence my grandchildren.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Work at the lab addresses head-on a generally taboo topic, how overweight children often turn into overweight adults. The ultimate goal of this research is to prevent that pattern from ever beginning. How? By creating an individualized early intervention plan for at-risk babies.
If we make improvements to the child's diet and eating environment and habits early, that we can change the trajectory.
Redmond expects results from this research next year. So far, 40 babies have been in the metabolic chamber and hundreds more in the pea pod. Jamison's mom, Julie, is aware that the research may not only help him, but millions of others.
More children have obesity. More children are developing diabetes. If I can prevent that for my children, I think other parents would want to do that too.
Babies like Jamison leading the way to fight obesity. Erica Edwards, NBC News, Baton Rouge, Louisiana.